Ever since Tears of the Kingdom came out, Zelda has been on a somewhat unset path. On one hand, Aonuma has said the series will be going open world from now on, and he can't see why people would prefer to play the older Zeldas. But on the other hand, a lot of people have come out to criticize Tears of the Kingdom, and they want a more traditional style Zelda game, or at least a new 2D Zelda in between the next 3D one that goes back to a more 2D style. Well, earlier this year, they announced just that. Although it didn't exactly go back to a more traditional style, with Zelda now as the main character, and with it taking many inspirations from Breath of the Wild. Many people were nervous about it being too similar to Tears of the Kingdom and having the same issues that game has, me included. But now the game is out, how well does it manage to work as a 2D Zelda game while including aspects of Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild? And does it come close to matching the feeling of A Link Between Worlds? In terms of how the story plays out and how it connects to the gameplay, most of the world is covered in these poison-like things called rifts, which end up eating a load of Hylians, including the king, replacing them with shadow versions that impose as them, forcing Zelda to get thrown in jail, with the Shadow King claiming she made all the rifts and if they kill her it will go away. Very similar to how A Link to the Past plays out with you being wanted by guards. In jail, you meet your companion named Tri, who, much like Navi, never shuts up. If you get annoyed by the game pausing to show you dialogue, be prepared, since this game never stops to have this fucker talk every 5 seconds. Anyway, Tri gives you the Tri Rod, which lets you create echoes. This was one thing I was worried about, since it kinda looked like you could easily cheese puzzles with it. But you're only able to create 3 at a time before upgrading it as you go through the game, so it does have some limits. As you escape from the jail, you have to use the echoes to hide from the guards, much like going through the courtyard in Ocarina of Time to find Princess Zelda. They also explain how you can use normal items like rocks to kill enemies, which aren't available to create echoes of. After you leave the jail, it gets consumed by a rift and you get washed ashore to the far south of the map, which then opens up to you the map and also the quest log screen, which is very similar to how it is in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Actually, pretty much every menu in this game has been taken from Tears of the Kingdom, including the awful item menu, which is just as annoying in this game. Many times I have spent multiple seconds scrolling through echoes to find the one I want. I don't understand why they can't just come up with something better than this. Anyway, after you obtain the item, you get to experience battling enemies, and since you aren't playing as Link, you can't use a sword, so the only way you can fight is with echoes. This makes fighting a lot more difficult than other 2D Zeldas like A Link Between Worlds, because the echoes aren't as easy to use as a sword and don't do as much damage. Once you kill the enemies, you can then turn the enemies into echoes and use them to fight other enemies. Using the enemies to fight other enemies gives more variety to the gameplay, but makes it a lot more tedious since you can't control when they attack and are usually just waiting to see what they will do. The sword does come back, but not in the normal way, and even with the sword, the enemies still do more damage, with some early enemies doing over 2 hearts of damage, which is a lot when you only have a couple of hearts to start off with. This game very much feels like it's taken inspiration from Breath of the Wild with its difficulty. But with this game, it's not as easy to find food and mass eat like in Breath of the Wild, so I would say it's more difficult overall. The main gameplay is pretty similar to previous 2D Zelda games, but also very different at the same time. You enter dungeons, but this time they are in alternate dimensions in the Rift. The controls, unlike Link's Awakening, now have full 360 controls, but compared to Link Between Worlds, I'm still not completely satisfied with them. They just don't feel as good as that game is to play with. The new thing in this game is the spin ability, which is very similar to the Deku Link spin from Majora's Mask. It helps getting to places faster, kinda like rolling in 3D Zelda games like Ocarina of Time, but it kinda wears off when you obtain Epona. Another new gameplay mechanic is Bind, which is very similar to Ultra Hand in Tears of the Kingdom. I was kinda worried about this since it was so overused in that game, but it isn't used nearly as much as I thought it would be. You can use it to move enemies and rocks, and you can also use it to grab onto certain objects and follow them when they move. In terms of puzzles, pretty much all of them revolve around using the echoes, with a lot of them requiring you to use them to build upwards, like making a staircase to get to higher ground. You could do this in multiple of ways, but it's limited to how many echoes you can have at once. There are also puzzles you need to solve by using enemy echoes, and there are the usual elemental puzzles, like light a fire to solve a puzzle. There are even puzzles that require you to use certain echoes that can float to get over water, which I thought was pretty cool. Speaking of spin-offs, in Tears of the Kingdom, a big issue people had was the side quests not being that special, and giving you crap rewards. Well, in Echoes of Wisdom, unfortunately the side quests aren't either anything special, but some of them do give you some cool upgrade materials. They are mostly fetch quests, with you having to find an echo or item to show the person in order to complete it, which gets pretty repetitive quickly. You either get food ingredients or materials for upgrades. I haven't done every side quest yet, but so far they haven't been that great. Though honestly, the side quests in Link Between Worlds weren't that great either. But at least we had the baseball minigame. One of the highlights of this game for me is the actual overworld itself, with it including many unique areas and things to find. We finally have the heart pieces back and empty bottles, but not really much else. Like in the side quests, you can find upgrade materials in chests, which is nice, but it feels like a lot of chests either have money or something not worth getting like food. I feel like if I'm going out my way to do a puzzle to get a chest, I want something more than just money. Another type of collectible is the stamp system. All over Hyrule are these stamp locations, very similar to Spirit Tracks. You are given a book that you can fill in with stamps for each area. The rewards you get are nothing special as far as I know, so it's more just doing it for fun. Either way, the lack of collectibles are kind of made up for with the different areas. The map is pretty big with it, including a desert, a lake, a forest, a mountain area. It feels a lot more interesting to Breath of the Wild's world, while being a lot smaller. Now for the big thing I want to talk about, the dungeons. In both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, the dungeons haven't been that great, with them mostly focusing on open-ended designs that have been severely limited by following the same basic layouts. Tears of the Kingdom slightly improved on it, with them having more unique bosses, but still had the same major issues. For Echoes of Wisdom, they are somewhat better, but I wouldn't say they are exactly amazing or anything. To start with, before you even enter the dungeon, similar to Tears of the Kingdom, you have a big story event thing you have to go through, where you go around talking to the villagers of that region. I like that they are incorporating some story into it instead of just having you go straight to the dungeon, but I do think they drag on for a bit too long, and there is a lot of going back and forth. As for the dungeons themselves, the first dungeon you go to feels pretty basic, but that's expected for the first dungeon in the game. The problem is the other dungeons are way too similar in design and aesthetics, not really changing too much in how they operate. It really doesn't go crazy enough in how the dungeons work. In Link Between Worlds we had the Tower of Hera, which was crazy since it was over 10 floors and had an outside section. These dungeons are nowhere near as cool, I think. The sand dungeon has you go outside for a bit, but because it's in the alternate dimension it just doesn't look that aesthetically pleasing. I just wish they went outside the box a bit and did stuff differently. The puzzles in the dungeons are actually pretty good, with them offering a decent level of challenge, but the actual dungeons themselves are just lacking. As for the sword ability, about halfway through the first dungeon you encounter Link. Except it's not Link, it's a shadow version of Link. Once you defeat him, you obtain his sword, except this sword can transform you into Link in a so-called sword fighter form. This form also lets you use arrows at a later date as well, but you can only use it for a limited time with it running out pretty quickly. You can recharge it by collecting magic energy thingies which are flying around the place, and also get it by killing enemies. You can then increase the meter with the materials you get from finishing side quests. I wish this power up didn't run out so quickly, but since it's so OP, I can understand why they had to make that addition. It just kinda sucks that the way to use sword and arrows in this game, among others, is locked behind a limited time super ability. To finish off, I want to talk about the more aesthetic side of the game, like visuals and sound. Visually, the game is very much based on the graphics used in Link's Awakening, but due to the bigger nature of the world, it is cut back somewhat in terms of detail. The overall lighting just isn't as effective compared to the remake. The frame rate is also significantly worse due to the world being bigger, though I expect when the Switch 2 comes out, that won't be an issue. To be honest, I really don't like the visuals in Link's Awakening, but I could cope with them due to the detail of the models and the environments being pretty high quality for a Switch game. But here it just looks very plasticky and cheap. As for the music and sound, I thought the music sounded very similar to the Link's Awakening remake, even though it's using all new tracks. And honestly, it's not that great. My standards are ridiculously high, but Zelda's music since Link Between Worlds has been pretty crap, and this isn't really helping anything. That's not to say all the tracks are bad. The theme in Southern Village I liked a lot. But most of the time I just ended up turning the music off, because I thought it was just bland and I wanted to listen to something else. Compared to Link Between Worlds, which has so many bangers like Lorule Castle, Death Mountain, even the baseball minigame theme was lit. By comparison, this game can't even really get the overworld theme right. Another thing I noticed, which was more of a nitpick, but when you get 4 heart pieces, it doesn't make the heart container jingle sound, with it only appearing when you get an actual heart container. As well as the chest sound not appearing either, I think they should have spent a bit more time on sound and music for the game. It just feels very lacking. So that's the new Zelda. I will say that I did have more fun with it than I thought I would, but it's not exactly anything close to the height that A Link Between Worlds achieved when it comes to 2D Zelda. It very much does feel like a spin-off over a mainline 2D Zelda game, which makes me hope they next do a proper 2D Zelda with Link and bring the items back. The puzzles and the echoes were actually not too bad, but I do prefer using the sword and regular items. Unfortunately, the dungeons were a massive letdown, along with the side quests. But I wouldn't say they were bad. This is kind of this game in a nutshell. It's not bad, but it's nothing amazing, which is what you should expect from a new Zelda title. They keep highlighting all the crazy new ways they are changing the series, but then they don't have the basic things be well done. If they can't get the dungeons right or the music right, then they really need to rethink how they do things. A big problem I think for this game is I don't know who it's for really. For new fans of the series that like 3D big open world games, it feels like it's too much of a niche game for them to be interested in. Where for hardcore Zelda fans, it feels too similar to Breath of the Wild for it to truly cater to them. I would still probably recommend this game to fans of 2D Zelda, as it does have somewhat decent dungeons and puzzles, but it could have been so much more. And to finish this off, I have made this song. Enjoy.
Echoes of wisdom is the name of the game. Puzzles a game, but the game is lame. Has many cool enemies, but they're not the same. Too many rules to play the game. Everything's locked when you go out, but when you find the echo, the effect goes out. Many dungeons, many clues, but they all are whack. When you find a cool tool, you can take it back. Echoes of wisdom is the name of the game.